Thanks for having us here.
It's great to have you here. Thank you.
Does it feel like it has been 40 years?
It feels like on one hand 80 years and on the other hand about 8 weeks.
What is the 80 years and what's the 8 weeks?
The 80 years is that restaurants are hard.
Yeah.
And I think keeping a restaurant fresh and on top of its game, especially in a city whose first name is new, where everybody likes what's new.
Yes.
And you're not the new kid on the block and haven't been for almost 40 years. It's hard. So in that respect, it feels like 80 years, but the 8 weeks it's fun. It's really, really fun coming to work every day and honoring the work we did yesterday, but trying to find ways we can make it even better and even more relevant today.
When you come in here, when you're in Union Square Cafe, are you flooded with memories at different times about milestones over the years? Or I guess, what's it like for Danny Meyer to walk into Union Square Cafe every day?
Well, there's a lot to being Danny Meyer walking in here. So for the first 10 years of my career, this was the one and only restaurant I had.
Right.
And it was in a different location. But all I did every single day was Union Square Cafe. I breathed it, tasted it, slept with it. You know, it was absolutely
It's
crazy.
a restaurant in New York. You have to.
It's a restaurant in New York. It was my first restaurant. This is where I learned to be a restaurateur. I was the guy on the front door, lunch, most of dinner.
Yeah.
I was typing the specials every single morning on my IBM Selector.
At least it wasn't a typewriter, right?
It was close.
Yeah.
It was close. I mean, that's
Yeah.
how long ago. Our idea of technology back then was we got a fax machine. So it's been a long time, but you know, when I come back here, there are still so many amazing memories. Half of Union Square Cafe's original mahogany bar, you have to know this, is upstairs at Union Square Cafe. And when I touched that mahogany, that was the maitre d' stand. That was where I spent every day of my life for 10 years. When I touch that piece of wood, it literally brings back every single memory I had when I was learning to be a restaurateur.
What was it at age 27 that sparked what this restaurant is that we know now?
There was a lot going on. So I didn't even know I wanted to be a restaurateur. I poli-sci major at Trinity College. What do poli-sci majors do? You're supposed to do. You go get a law degree. So I took the LSATs, probably bombed them. And the night before I took them, my uncle, who saw what a foul mood I was in, said, "What's wrong with you anyway?" And I said, "I got to take my LSAT tomorrow."
Right.
He said, "Of course you do. You want to be a lawyer?" And I said, "I don't." And God bless him, on that night, he said, "You're going to be dead a hell of a lot longer than you're going to be alive. Why would you do something you don't want to do?" And I said, "I have no idea what else I could do." And it took that night for him to say to me, "All I've ever heard you talk about your whole life is food and restaurants. You got to open a restaurant." So that led to doing this. I never dreamed of it, and I will tell you that the world is a better place for one reason. I would have been the world's worst lawyer. So,
Well, I'd say two, because the rest of us would have been deprived of not only Union Square Cafe, but everything that came from it.
well, what I came to learn is that I loved hospitality, and I loved restaurants, and I loved food, just like he told me. But I also didn't love the way a lot of restaurants treated their patrons.
Right.
And being from St. Louis, where when I grew up, and primarily in the 1970s, the food was okay, it was not bad, but what was off the charts was the way they made you feel. And when I moved to New York, the food was great, but they didn't make you feel all that great. This is back in the 1980s now. And, you know, I think a lot of restaurants thought that they were the next coming of Studio 54, where they were going to decide who was good enough to get a good table, who wasn't even good enough to get a reservation.
Right.
And I said, there's an amazing opportunity to open the kind of restaurant that, if only it existed, would be my favorite restaurant, which is one that had really good food and they treated you nicely.
Why did you want to do it, though? In New York, I would say, probably the hardest market to open a restaurant?
Yeah, two reasons. I didn't think I was going to live in New York for more than a year. I wanted to do a year here after college. But as a Midwesterner, Chicago was
Right.
really the New York of the Midwest. And truth be told, that's where I thought I was going to open my first restaurant. I took my then girlfriend, now my wife of 37 years, Audrey, to Chicago, and happened to be the world's coldest day ever in Chicago.
Not too difficult, but yes.
And she's an East Coaster, and she said, I don't think so. And so really that's what made up my mind, because I said, I'm never going to get an Audrey in Chicago. I'm going to come back here.
Thank you, Audrey, from all of us. Thank you, Audrey.
So literally that was reason number one. But reason number two was this. You know, a lot of people say New York is hard, it's competitive,
Yeah.
it's the toughest city to open a restaurant. I would differ. And I would say in a lot of respects, New York was a big advantage. Why? We had access to the best ingredients in the country, great farmers markets. Everybody could import great ingredients from Europe at that time. We had access to an amazingly talented talent pool,
Right.
labor, cooks. A lot of cooks back in those days had to start their career in New York because not every city in the country then had great restaurants as they now do.
Yeah.
So we could get great cooks. I would say the clientele here is really, really sophisticated. They travel all over the world. And finally, and probably most importantly in terms of the advantage of opening in New York City, was that if you think about it, the media who could pay attention to your restaurants was all here. Gourmet Magazine, Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, the New York Times. So if you did something really well, it was going to get noticed.
Right.
And I'm not sure it would have been any easier opening in my hometown of St. Louis.
Maybe harder in the sense of all of those things might be more expensive and you might not get the attention.
I think you're right.
You mentioned some of the ideas of things that you wanted as somebody who was coming from St. Louis. And it's so hard. I talk about this a lot of times nowadays, talking to chefs or restaurateurs about what we expect. Now, yes, it's going to be farm to table. Yes, everything's going to be fresh. There is going to be the service
Seasonal.
level, seasonal, exactly, a seasonal menu. This just wasn't what people were doing then. And so I am fascinated. You say it so effortlessly, but how did you know those things would work, or why was it so important for you to have those things?
Let's keep in mind a few things. This was already happening in a big, big way in San Francisco and in the Bay Area.
Okay,
Alice Waters,
yeah.
a number of great chefs, Joyce
Right.
Goldstein, Jeremiah Tower. They were cooking food of the day, of
Yeah.
the season. In New York City, it was a big deal when a restaurant called the Four Seasons said, I think this was probably in the 1970s, they said, we're going to be a seasonal restaurant. No one had ever heard of that before. We're going to change our menu 4 times a year. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
Before opening Union Square Cafe, I cooked in Italy and in France because I was too afraid to tell my own parents that I was going to be a restaurateur, and in some crazy notion that they would accept it if I was going to be a chef. So I said, I'm going to be a chef. I got some stages, some internships over there. And when I was in Bordeaux cooking at a Michelin 2-star restaurant, the chef there, who housed me on the cot in his living room, because that's the only place I could afford to stay, would take me every single morning to their market. And you bought what had grown that day or the day before. And it wasn't something you needed to put on your menu. It wasn't a political statement.
Right.
It wasn't a marketing idea. It's just the way you did it.
Yeah.
And so what that informed me, having spent some time eating on the West Coast, cooking in France, also in Italy, that's what made me pick the spot that would become Union Square Cafe, that was, 3 steps from the best farmers market in the Northeast, the Union Square Green Market. And I had never seen anything like that in New York City. And I said, we can do, in a very natural way, what's happening in all the restaurants that I love the most all over the world.
Not as easy necessarily, though, to say, I want to be here and now here's the real estate.
Well, the real estate part was hard in one respect. Again, it was that really cold winter of 1984 going into 1985. And I was just walking all over the city because the biggest thing I wanted to be able to do for New Yorkers was to offer really good dining value. Another thing that was informing me way back then is that the time that I was cooking in Italy, the dollar was really, really strong against the lira. Does anyone remember the lira
yes.
before the euro?
Long before euros, right.
And you could get one of the world's greatest bowls of pasta in Rome or in Florence or Bologna for basically $5 or $6, the equivalent of $5 or $6.
Yeah.
And I came to New York, and people were selling pasta in 1985 for $18, $19 a bowl. That would equate today to something like $45
I was just going to say
or something.
$50 or something.
And so one of the things I really wanted to do was to turn that all on its head and offer really good dining value, because I always thought hospitality, the way restaurants make you feel is everything. And I think that the menu price is a subset of hospitality. If you feel like the restaurant's ripping you off, you probably don't feel like they're on your side. So that meant that I had to find real estate that was not going to force me to charge too much money
Right.
for everything on the plate. And so by pounding the pavement during that cold winter, I just walked into a restaurant one day. It was open, didn't have a broker. I just walked in and still can't believe I did this. And I asked the cashier sitting in the front of this vegetarian restaurant, could I please meet the owner? Why? I just want to see if he wants to sell his restaurant. I mean, who would do that? Who would do that?
You would.
So the cashier gave me the owner's phone number. He said, you'll have to call him another time. And I called him. And Sam Brown, who owned the 49-year-old vegetarian restaurant Brownies, met me one day wearing his sandals with his white socks and his little peace sign hanging around his neck. And he said, how did you know I wanted to sell my restaurant? I said, what? I didn't know that. I love this neighborhood right next to the Green Market. And I thought that would be a fun thing to do. And he said, well, I actually am thinking about retiring.
Wow.
And so that started our conversation. And I was able to buy the last 13 years of his 30-year lease. And we were paying $8 a square foot for the first 2 or 3 years of Union Square Cafe, which allowed us not only to offer great dining value, but also great value on the wine list. And that meant that we had a restaurant that you could go to that eating bar, which people were also not doing back then in New York City. And on any given Wednesday or Saturday, on the Green Market days, you would have a Green Market farmer having lunch, sitting next to an advertising executive, sitting next to a magazine writer. And that was a big part of what made Union Square Cafe Union Square Cafe.
It's something I think people take for granted now. That's like, well, that happens now all the time. It didn't then.
It didn't happen then.
Where, again, I'm thinking the idea, so that the wanting that clientele to be diverse, all these things, do they all kind of go back to something you experienced somewhere else that you wanted to put into one thing?
If I could think of one thing, it was that since I did always love eating out, and I was a salesman for the first 3 years I lived in New York City, and what that meant was I was
You ate out a
driving,
lot.
I was eating out, not only eating out a lot, but eating by myself.
Right.
Because I was making sales calls, and we didn't have the internet, but I had a nose for where the good restaurants were. And most of the restaurants I was going to were just neighborhood joints or diners. They were not expensive places, but I loved eating. I loved learning about neighborhoods of New York based on who lived there and what kind of food they served. So I was always by myself, and I just kept getting this sense of how it felt to be a solo diner. And that first and foremost informed wanting to have a great bar for diners. And if a solo diner was going to eat in the restaurant, they were going to get the best table in the house. Because I saw that whenever I was a solo diner,
Shoved in the
either they
corner.
wouldn't give me a reservation because
Yeah.
they said, oh, this guy's not going to bring us enough revenue, or they would shove me by the bathroom or in the worst, the worst corner by the kitchen they possibly could. There were so many restaurants I wanted to go to where they wouldn't give me a table for one, and I would take to making a
insane to
reservation
me.
for
For
two.
two.
And I would look at my watch like this. Where is my guest? And then I would order a bottle of wine, so they couldn't kick me out. A whole bottle of wine just for me. And then I would offer the second half to the restaurant, as if to say, next time, just be nicer to a solo diner.
Yeah, I still can cover this
So-
bill for you. I didn't ask you this, and you've done so many interviews, and I'm sure it's discussed, but for you, when you talk about a love of food, where is that from? You said growing up, you just always loved food.
I did always love food, and I think a lot of it had to do with the people I grew up with. My dad was in the travel business, primarily selling group tours to France and Italy.
Right.
And early in my life, like when I was, I think as young as 6 or 7, we had French people living in our home. And there was always a bottle of wine on the table, always French being spoken at the table, generally when my parents did not want us to understand what they were talking about, which forced us all to learn to speak French.
Right.
And it just was one of these things, because of his business. I got to travel to France as a 7-year-old. I kept a diary, which I did not want to do, but my mom made me. And I still have that diary. And I was writing at the age of 7 about quiche Lorraine and creme fraiche and fraise des bois and baguettes. I mean, who does that?
Right.
Who has a dog at the age of 7 named Ratatouille? That was us.
Meant to be, basically, in some
So
ways.
it just was breathe. You know, it's what we breathed the air was food.
But you didn't think it could be a career for you.
Never, never.
Thank God for your uncle.
Yeah, I mean, listen, as an entrepreneurial pursuit, it was not really considered to be a valid pathway.
Well, there weren't Danny Meyers then. It wasn't the era of the Food Network in time where people saw this as being, that it could be lucrative in a different way.
And beyond lucrative, because I think that the lucrative part either does or doesn't come, but if it does come, it's only because you really care deeply about showing people a good time.
Right.
And that's what mattered to me more than anything. I did work for my dad as a tour guide in Italy for one summer when I was 20 years old. And as a tour guide, and I would have 22 people who were really cranky when they got off the airplane. And I also found, you know, leaving food aside for a second anyway, that I had this incredible ability to figure out who was the crankiest person, and I could figure out how, over the course of the 3 to 5 days I was going to have these guys,
Yeah.
I was going to turn that into the happiest person. So I had that, and then part of what I did to make them happy was I kept taking them to trattorias, and I was getting a 1,000 lira commission for every person I brought in. So I was like, I was getting paid to learn about food, learn about taking care of people. What could be better?
Yeah. And enjoy it all with them.
Yeah.
In that sense. When you opened, as you said, this was your only place for a long time. Does it have a special place in your heart for that reason? Because Union Square hospitality does not exist without Union Square Cafe.
I obviously named Union Square Hospitality after Union Square Cafe. It does have a special place. You know, when people ask me which is my favorite of all of our restaurants,
It's like picking between your kids.
that's the first thing I would say, and I'll give the same answer, the one giving me the least amount of problems that week. But it's also fair to say that, you know, if you've spent 10 years with only one,
Yeah.
it obviously has a special place. And this is the restaurant that taught me how to be a restaurateur. I didn't know what I was doing when we opened this place.
4 chefs, 3 chefs in the history of it. Okay.
4 chefs in 40 years.
That's insane. That doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen.
What does that speak to? Does it speak to, what does that, saying 4 chefs in 40 years, what does that speak to?
Well, I think that it speaks to the community that is Union Square Cafe. It's a family, it's a mom and pop business that at heart, but it's a business that's of its community. And I think the minute that I chose the name Union Square Cafe as opposed to some other really bad ideas I had, which you don't want to hear
No,
about.
now I'm gonna ask now.
Well, yeah, here are some of the really bad ideas I had. Piazza del Unione,
I think we were all glad that did not work. Yeah.
Bimmy, which was my grandmother's nickname,
Very sweet, but no.
Blue Plate Bar and Grill.
I could see that working, but not for here. Yeah.
So thankfully, when I ran all those by my dad, he said, "Why don't you just call it what it is?" And I said, "Well, what?" He said, "It's Union Square Cafe." And I said, "Dad, have you ever been to Union Square in New York? Because it was not very nice back then."
Yeah.
And he said, "But it could be. Have you ever been to Union Square in San Francisco? Everybody wants Union Square as their address in San Francisco."
Right.
So, but the minute that I named it Union Square Cafe, it put us in a position where this would be a restaurant of its neighborhood. And the reason that there's one Union Square Cafe is that it's like a wine that has terroir. So unlike Shake Shack, where there can be many of them, it's a restaurant that should taste like where it was grown. And it makes it really special. And I think the chefs who have cooked here understood that implicitly when they took the job, and then the restaurant becomes them over time.
Well, you said taste, so now I have to. We have some staples with stories.
Yeah,
Like
there's.
the bar nuts.
I think you're looking at 4 of the items, the only 4 of the items that have been on the menu almost since the very, very beginning.
Bar nuts.
Bar nuts. So the story there is that I went to a hotel restaurant in San Francisco, the Campton Place Hotel,
Okay.
and I smelled this rosemary. Didn't even know where it was coming from, and my nose took me right to their bar, and they had just come out of the oven, piping hot. And I said, "That's the best, handful of nuts I think
literally
I've ever
just
had
took
in my
some
life."
with the rosemary, and I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, oh yeah.
So basically what I've always been able to do with our chefs, because I'm a really good home cook, I couldn't possibly cook the way they cook in a restaurant. And so we have a joke. They say, "Danny, you go hear the music somewhere else, come back and hum the tune, and I'll show you how it's supposed to be played." So I came back and I hummed the tune of these amazing bar nuts. They ended up being at our bar every single afternoon.
So good.
And to this day, we put this recipe in the first Union Square Cafe
Yeah.
cookbook. You see these nuts everywhere now.
Well, I was going to say, it's another one of those things where people take for granted, like, well, that's normal. No, it used to be there's some Planters peanuts on the
Right.
bar. That was it. If that, yes, if you were lucky.
And so, I can go around. I get inspiration almost anywhere. So the Gruyere salad, which no one would ever let us take off the menu here, came from having lunch in Paris one Sunday afternoon with Audrey, probably in the late 1980s.
Okay.
And it's really hard to find a great place open on Sunday lunch, it turned out back then, unless you wanted to go to a brasserie. And a friend had told me about this restaurant called Moissonnier, had this dish, changed my life. And I came back and I hummed the tune, and Michael Romano turned it into
Created-
a dish that we cannot take off the menu.
So, are you going to join me and have a little bit of it? If I can do this.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna actually take one of these while you
Right.
do that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna tell you this story. This is a great one. The hot garlic potato chips. I'll have one of these, and you
I'm gonna
definitely
have
you
one while
definitely
you do
cannot,
too.
you
Cheers
definitely
to that,
cannot
to the hot
you definitely
garlic.
cannot only
Yeah.
eat one of these. So, our opening menu at Union Square Cafe, we had confit of duck, which was a
Okay.
dish I had learned in Bordeaux, and we served it with cottage fries, which are based. I learned that in St. Louis, but in Bordeaux, they didn't call them cottage fries, but they were quarter-inch thick
Thicker one, yeah.
potatoes that we would saute in goose fat, garlic, and parsley,
Wow.
and serve it with the duck. So that's what we were doing. One day the chef was off, our first chef of Union Square Cafe, he was off, and I'm in the kitchen, which is never a good
As
idea.
I just said, oh no, because you told me it's not a good
Never a
thing.
good idea. And the cook set the mandolin, that's the table slicer, on
Okay.
the wrong setting, cutting the potatoes. They accidentally come out like this. And so the question was, "Danny, do we have to 86 them? Because there's not cottage fries, they're chips." And I said, "We don't have a choice. It's too late, guys. The show's on."
Right.
So we served these things. Everybody fell in love with
They're
them.
amazing.
And they ended up being a staple on the menu. And we don't serve
You can't-
confit of duck anymore, but
but
we
you
do
still
serve
serve
these
these.
chips. The burger has been on the menu since we first opened Union Square Cafe. As a matter of fact, the burger has always gone through subtle changes based on who the chef is. Subtle. The quality of the meat and the source of the meat is always the same. So we use Pat LaFreda.
Right.
And this is where we got the idea to use Pat LaFreda for Shake Shack many, many years later, which then put Pat LaFreda on the map.
Everybody knows,
Put Shake
yeah.
Shack on the map. But it's really a very, very simple burger. This one is grilled, unlike the smash burgers you see everywhere today. And we've always served it with your choice of cheese and bacon on a homemade seeded bun with French fries, fresh French fries.
I mean,
So, and you know what? A burger has the role at a restaurant of sending out a message that you could come here every day. I think restaurants that don't have burgers are great. But when a restaurant does put a burger on, it's kind of a message. You could come here every day, even when you don't want the fancy schmancy
Yeah.
kind of food. Not that
The
our
duck
food is very
confit.
fancy. Exactly. Gnocchi. This is from our third chef, Carmen Quagliata, who had been cooking in California at a restaurant called Trevina up in the Napa Valley. We always had gnocchi on the menu at Union Square Cafe. But our gnocchi were always, as they are in Rome, made from potatoes. Carmen put a new twist on it and made them with ricotta cheese, no potatoes whatsoever. And these ricotta gnocchi have often been called floating pillows because they're so
Because
light.
they are. By the way,
There's-
I've never had them, and oh my God.
Okay, well, I haven't had it for a long time, so there we go.
Wow.
That's
Oh my
pretty
God, it's delicious. Absolutely delicious.
good. So now, getting back to your earlier question, keeping Union Square Cafe fresh for 40 years.
Right.
How do you do it? You probably have a favorite musical band that you grew up with. Mm-hmm. Care to say who it is?
Well, I mean, I have many, but I'm such a Billy Joel person, so
All right. I'm sure you saw the documentary.
I did see
which
the
is
doc,
amazing.
which is amazing. Yes.
All right, so if you went to a Billy Joel concert, by the way, I saw him when he was in St. Louis when he was the warm-up act to a guy named Jesse Colin Young.
God.
He had just come out with Piano Man, and we knew he was. We didn't know he was going to be that
Right,
special.
but you knew it was something a little
It
different.
was incredible.
Right.
So, let's say Billy Joel. Now you go to it, you love him, and you want to see his second concert or his third concert, not where he is today. He wants to sell his new album and play all the new songs. You want to
want the
hear
old
all
one.
the songs that are your favorites. And it's a lot like that in the restaurant business, which is when you come back here, you want your favorites or you won't come back, but you also want some new stuff or you won't come back.
Yeah.
And so there's this gentle kind of art that we've been right on the middle, right on the 50-yard line for all these years, trying to play that just right.
Yeah.
So that the restaurant continues to evolve and it continues to give you what you came back for. And so these kind of dishes need to stay on our menu, but then a chef like Lena has to keep pushing it forward.
You mentioned this is so. Lena came in at potentially the worst time for anybody to come in just before COVID was hitting.
Like just before.
Just right, like January of that of 2020. But what was it? Take that sort of out of the mix. Not that you knew that was coming, but what was it about her that when you knew it was time to change, where she was the right person for this?
Well, I knew Lena because Lena had already cooked in 3 of our restaurants at that point. You wouldn't believe it when you see how young she is, but she had been the chef at Marta, our former pizza restaurant. She had been a cook at Gramercy Tavern. She had been a cook at Maialino, our Roman restaurant. And if you think about it, Union Square Cafe is this incredible blend of my love for Italy, the bistros of France, and a little bit of the West Coast, the Bay Area
Yeah.
of California, which I love so much. And what they all have in common is that they're not about flash, they're about yummy. It's what we call sprezzatura, which is that when you eat something here, it should feel a lot simpler than it actually was.
It's like having the no makeup look. It took hours, but
That's it.
yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And so I knew Lena was an amazing cook. I knew that Lena loves all the kind of foods that I was just talking about. Mm-hmm. And I also felt that it was her time to really step up. This is the first restaurant of Union Square Hospitality Group. We call this the Mother Yeast. And it really matters who the chef is here in a big, big way. And we got it right. We got lucky. We got lucky every single time with every single chef who's been here.
it's more than lucky. I mean, because maybe there's luck that plays a factor, but that selection isn't done at a whim.
No. I know the frame really, really well, so
Yeah.
I should know the art that belongs in that frame.